Welcome to the Second Bite Podcast, where we talk with top entrepreneurs and CEOs about creating valuable companies through creative transactions. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, and welcome back to the Second Bite Podcast. We are bringing back our PE Insight series. I did this a couple of years ago, and it was clearly one of our most popular segments that we have done on the Second Bite Podcast. And it's thematically based. So I'm going to ask a question to 5 or 6 private equity folks that are very successful in the lower middle market. And we'll ask the question, and then each of the guests will answer the same question. And we've just got them all in a row here. So I hope you like this. We got great feedback before. Thank you to our sponsor, the good folks at Tower Partners, for making the podcast successful and available. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for guests that you think would be interesting, please reach out and let me know. All right. This question is critical, I think, for investors and sellers thinking about a second bite opportunity. The question was that we often see founders that'll roll anywhere from 20% to 50% into an opportunity to align their interests for a second bite. Beyond the financial rollover, what other behavioral signs or green flags do you see during the diligence period that tells you that the founder really is committed to the next phase of growth? Here's what our guest had to say. Chad Scripps from Blacklake. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, when we at Blacklake are negotiating an LOI, and obviously from that point forward in an acquisition, one of the best signs for us is when that business owner is really focused on what are his rights within the business going forward. How is he able to make his vision a reality? Meaning, what happens if we do have a disagreement? Of course, you always have disagreements. No matter how much alignment you have and how much conversation you have, you're going to have disagreements. Is he focused on what his rights are when we have a disagreement, on how he can make sure that he still has the ability to run the business? Is he really focused on what his rights are as a shareholder going forward? Is he really focused on how he can get ownership to the rest of his team if the business does well? Those are things that we really like to see. And of course, a seller should be focused on how much cash they get at closing and what the reps and warranties are and all those sorts of things. And so we don't necessarily look at that as a red flag. But if all we're talking about is the cash at the end of the day, and all we're talking about is how do you get me more cash at closing, that's a little bit of I'd say at least a yellow sign for us. And look, that's part of the reason that we are willing to do minority transactions at Blacklake, which is something we don't see a ton of in the industry. I think, for us, the difference between owning, say 40% of a business and 85% of a business, there is no special line at 50.1%, because our view is that no matter what the transaction is, be it substantial minority to a complete buyout, we will have certain protections as a shareholder, including, the ability to keep cash from leaving the business in certain circumstances, the ability to approve an acquisition, the ability to approve a budget. Those are things that we will always want to have. On the other hand, even if we buy 100% of the business, we don't buy the relationships that our management team has with their employees, with their customers, with their vendors. Those things stay with people because we are not doing that job, day in, day out. And so we need to be honest with ourselves, regardless of how much we own, with the power that our team has to influence our investment. On the other hand, that business owner, we think, needs to understand that they're taking on a partner. Whether we have, as I mentioned, a minority ownership or 100% ownership, we need to be a part of those decisions. We need to be viewed as a value add to that process. So that's given us flexibility, and also allows us to find those business owners who really believe in their vision. I believe in it so much that even though I want some liquidity, I really want to own control. Okay, that to us is a really good sign.
Great perspective, Chad Scripps. Thank you. Lee Minkoff from Renovus. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we take a little bit of a different approach. So at Renovus, 85% of our transactions we're buying from founders, families, owner entrepreneurs, but non-institutional capital owners. We ask them straight up at the beginning, what do you want to do? What do you want to do with the business, with your life? Shoot it, tell us straight. We would rather just get an honest, raw response to determine, our interests, the valuation we put forward, the way we structure the deal. If an owner that's really critical to the business is in, then we have to spend a lot of time assessing, hey, are you in? Are you the right person? Do we agree that you should be in? If the owner wants to be out, you just made our job really easy. We need to replace you, right? But how does that replacement impact the deal, right? We need to document a transition out. Is the CEO founder moving to executive chairman, or are they completely out of the picture totally? Are we finding a new CEO? Probably yes. How does the comp in the market for that industry compare to what the founder CEO has been paying himself or herself in the past? And does that impact the EBITDA you're underwriting? Obviously, if the founder's heavily involved in the business and there's going to be a founder transition, all else equal, that would lower the multiple, right? Because there's just added execution risk to the business. That said, you go to firms like Renovus, where we're, ton of the deals we do, the founder's transitioning out, right? You've got a founder that wants to transition out 100%. You've got a founder that wants to stay in 100% for the full hold, and then there's everything in between. And we've seen it all, right? When you've done 150 plus transactions, and 80 to 85% of those have, we've bought from founders, you've kind of seen it. And so our thing is just spend the time. We like to be in person, Zoom and Teams. Obviously, we're doing that right now, Todd, but I think we're a couple 100 miles away. But that became sort of a thing during COVID, right? People were doing deals without spending time in person. We didn't do that. We are believers in, FaceTime, being in person, playing some golf, having a beer, breaking some bread. That's the best diligence you can do. Ultimately, you got to ask the hard questions and have the hard conversations and make subjective judgment calls on if people are being truthful, and have contingency plans in place if they're not being truthful. So it's not so much the behaviors. We're spending the time. We're asking the questions. We're determining if we believe the answers. But it's also having the right alignment and plan in place after you write the check.
That's helpful perspective. Lee Minkoff, thank you. Larry Shagrin from Mill Pond, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, this is obviously, sort of a highly subjective sort of topic that's sort of very, very deal and founder specific. We really don't have rules of thumb that we sort of live by. We try and really, for this topic particularly, just be very good listeners throughout our time with a founder, really listen to their objectives. And what we tell them is, look, just be transparent with us, and we can create a transaction structure around your objectives. It's obviously got to work for us, but we can really address those objectives if we truly understand. So we really do look for, we look for things that are going to just limit the transition risk. First and foremost, we believe most businesses, if they're the kind of businesses that are right for Mill Pond, aren't going to have a lot of key man risk, right? There's something about the business model that's much stronger than any one individual at that company. So we're looking for that first and foremost. We're also looking for just a good team in place beneath them. They may not have that CEO there, but there is a semblance of a team. And then the third element that, we'll look for, in addition to sort of just the strength of the business model and the strength maybe of the existing team, right, is a scenario where, again, we know that end market very well, and we view that as a company where you can recruit somebody to as the CEO. We've just seen, Todd, in our experience, just very little correlation, frankly, between the rollover amount and the success of a transaction. We sold a company a couple of years ago. It was a 15x deal. Incredible company. And we bought 100% of the company. The CEO is, in her early 70s and poor in health, and we bought the whole business. We've got another one right now. We haven't fully realized, but the EBITDA has grown 3x in that one. Founder, owner, wanted to sort of not be involved at all going forward. We had a good president there. We backed him. He's done a great job with the business, and it's performed super well. So, other cases we've had rollover, and frankly, the individual that rolled over, wasn't going to be day to day long term, and we're working our tails off to create value at the portfolio company, and we lose 20-30% of the ups. So, we obviously aren't penny wise and pound foolish around that topic, but we really try and assess sort of that transition risk. And if there is something, if it is something we typically can't get over, it's usually something related to that business model that it's not going to be right for us.
That's super helpful, Larry Shagrin. Thank you very much. Tommy Cooperrider from Dynamic Core. What are your perspectives there?
Yeah, great question. I mean, we work with founders, owner-operators almost every day. I think this goes back to a theme that I mentioned earlier. At Dynamic Core, I think we're always looking for folks. We're partnering with people who are inquisitive and curious, right? And so the way that shows up in this scenario is that founder or is that management team, are they asking questions about process, about reporting, about how to be positioning the business for value creation, about what playbooks and resources are available, or are the questions more about like governance requirements and how they're protected and things like that. It just it gives you sort of the vibe that it creates when they're asking those sorts of questions is one that can question the type of partnership you're setting up. And then, another good signal is just for founders how they treat the rest of their management team during diligence. Are they readily introducing you to people? Are they being very, very protectionist and wanting everything to run through them? How much credit are they giving to the rest of their team? Are they already thinking about how they can grow the team to support it at, $100-200 million of revenue versus the 30 million of revenue today. So yeah, look, I think to summarize, it's really about the ones who are more excited about what we're going to be building towards together, as opposed to just what is the transaction on the table today.
Yeah, that's helpful, Tommy Cooperrider. Thank you, Stuart Coleman from Superstep. How do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think this is one that you kind of know when you see it. We have our model is very predicated on partnering with founders, and we have founders who we see early on dig into curiosity around what we can do together, how we think about the business, where we might want to go from a capability perspective or an ICP perspective, and who are very collaborative in that upfront process. And those are really good signs. Those that are curious to get our opinions. At the end of the day, if we're going to be a valuable partner, we need to have a two-way kind of conversation around building the best business, and we want to be a voice in the room. We don't want to be driving the business, but we want to be a partner that is valued. And so I think that becomes very clear up front. So that's one. On a similar kind of basis, we need folks who want to who really value their independence. And entrepreneurs are independent people. They wanted out. They had a vision. They wanted to start something. And so how is that independence still there? Do they have this desire an ambition to build a really large company and think that there's something wrong with the model of their competitors, and have the belief in themselves that they can go out with a partner and take them out, right, and take share. you see that come through in planning exercises. You see that come through also when they're vetting Superstep. And so when we're doing a deal, we often pretty early are saying, why don't you talk to our CEOs and founders? We want you to hear from them how we're a partner, and hopefully what you hear from them resonates and are the types of things and that you're looking for in a partner. And so if they're asking for that early on, it means they care about that partnership and the longevity of what it has.
Stuart Coleman, that's really helpful perspective. Thank you for sharing. Jamie Kennedy from Griffin's Wharf, what are your thoughts there?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, the second bite is still the most important alignment mechanism. And that's why we love your podcast so much, Todd. We really lean into that directly. And we're constantly telling our management teams and our selling shareholders that we want them to make meaningfully more money on that second bite at the apple than they did on the first. We're typically going to actually model that out for them and present it to them prior to close. And if that prospect doesn't energize them, that's information for us as well. But in terms of like what incremental behavioral signals we're looking for, we like when they have the management or the selling team has a real long-term plan, have specifics around whether it's a 5-year EBITDA revenue goal, vague ambition, or just I'd want a net worth of X at exit is typically a yellow or red flag. But when they have a real thoughtful plan and a path to get there, it's certainly a green flag. We always say internally that any management team member that has a C in their title has the capacity for sales. So we want to dig down deeper and see what, if they're just telling us because they're saying something they think a buyer is going to want to hear versus what they've actually done and done some legwork and prepared for that next level of growth. Identified those growth levers. It could be new products, new geographies, new adjacencies. We just want to make sure that they put in the thoughts and have those preliminary conversations where they're really excited about pursuing that post-close. Other signals we'll look for is an openness to building a team, lateral hires, senior hires, making sure that, the founders are really interested in doing that and building out the platform, and a willingness to professionalize other parts of the business, whether it's the systems and the reporting. Because I think upfront friction usually leads to increased post-close friction. So the buy-in upfront is very important. And it's important. It's also not a one-way street. We're not coming in saying, hey, this is how it's going to be. It's a very collaborative conversation where we're all aligning prior to close to know where we want to get to, and really have that roadmap once we hit the road the day after the money's wired. Lastly, qualitatively, energy in the room. Whenever a seller is in there and they light up talking about the future, again, it's very qualitative, but it's palpable. And it's something we always look for. So, the rollover aligns the incentives, but the signals that we just outlined, that that's where we're really trying to get the alignment that's going to translate into the retention of key employees and ultimately the effort through our whole period.
Yeah, it's a very helpful perspective, Jamie Kennedy. Thank you. Brian Schmidt from Court Square. What are your thoughts?
Time spent well ahead of a process is critical, Todd. So you develop a real relationship with a founder. You're more likely to get the unvarnished story from him or her. We like to get to know our founder partners well in advance of a process. On average, we've known our founder partners 2 years before investing with them. And what that helps with, it helps you parse apart reality from theater from a go forward founder intent perspective, right? It's really difficult to judge founder intent going forward, especially in a process where it's a 1 to 2 month sale process. There's multiple bidders. Your access to management restricted. So with that said, what I have seen, the best founders will talk about the future with ambition, not relief that they're finally getting to an exit event. They're truly excited about the next chapter. I'll say rollover matters a lot, but also behavior is equally as important. And look, the combination of the two makes you as an investor feel much more comfortable. Green flags, intellectual honesty, self-awareness, and an openness to the weakness areas, both with the founder CEO themselves, but also within the business, right? Where's help needed? Where's investment needed? And you can watch them throughout diligence. And that's why the benefit of time, I think, is really important. But you can watch how they react to diligence questions. And so I think strong partners founders, CEOs, they'll engage thoughtfully with you. They won't get defensive about every challenge or hole in the business, and they'll want to work to address it. And I think that's the sign of what a future strong partner actually looks like. And then the final thing I'd say, right, is are they building the business themselves? And that goes back to the old question of, what does a good CEO have in common with a bad CEO? And the answer is obviously the business can run without them. And so you kind of look for, are they investing properly in management below them, level 1 and level 2? Are they delegating, tasks properly to people? And are they building an institution with process and it's not a founder run business that's solely revolving around them?
Brian Schmidt from Court Square, thank you. Bill Summershield from Keystone, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think rollover obviously is a pretty big indicator of how bought in they are. Occasionally we will get into situations where there's a retiring founder and a very clear succession plan. We're open to that discussion, where they may not be rolling over as much as we would expect from somebody that we're going to be continuing to work with for years into the future. But I think that's few and far between. Look, I think one of the biggest things is really team exposure for us versus gatekeeping. And so, again, not every situation is the same, but where a founder or an entrepreneur, CEO is actively bringing their core team into the discussion, they're giving them exposure to us, they're letting them ask questions and get comfortable over the course of the diligence period. And then, obviously in turn, us getting comfortable with them, like that's a really good sign that they are focused on, hey, I'm excited about what can be built, where we can go, why we're bringing on a partner, and I want my team to see that. So that over the years, I've kind of noticed is a pretty big indicator. Look, we go into every new partnership really building out a thoughtful and sophisticated value creation plan. And we work closely with the team to make sure we're aligned on that. We try to do that before we close. So we'll do it during the LOI period. Again, to make sure that we're, ironing out the kinks in how we see the opportunity versus what their strategy is. And I think both the openness and the ownership that a team takes in really driving that process with us and being, creative and coming up with those ideas is, again, kind of a big behavioral signal to us that they're committed to, really building something special. And again, that excitement, building that playbook, I'd say is maybe the other really big thing. So it's that exposure, and then it's kind of, blue sky. How do we think about where we want to get, 3, 5, 7 years, whatever the time horizon may be, and are we really doing the work to align on that?
Very insightful. Bill Summershield from Keystone, thank you. So I think that's great insight. And it's great to hear it directly from private equity investors rather than consultants or advisors, or to hear from the guys that control the checkbook, that do the analytics, that make the decisions, I think is very informative as we think about how we want to maximize the value, not only of our initial transaction, but future transactions as well. Again, I'm going to say thanks to the folks at Tower Partners, voted by Axial as the #1 lower middle market investment bank in 2025. I hope you enjoyed this series. We've got 6 of them out there, so go track down the others.
Thanks for listening to the Second Bite podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.